Oh, noob mistakes. We are all guilty of them at some point. So I asked you guys to confess, and here's what we got. Okay, well maybe that's not helpful, but here's the real number one. Thinking the game will explain itself. Almost all endgame activities are very difficult to beat, and they only become harder if you're trying to figure out the strategy all by yourself. So let the pros take care of the walkthrough for you and go watch a guide on whatever activity you're trying to beat. And when you're looking for advice on what to do, be careful about who you believe. Ever since Among Us became a thing, people have been doubting their teammates in online gaming. And maybe you should too. I mean, that portal over there looks like the right way to go, and your teammate might be encouraging you to check it out, but I'd watch out if I were in your shoes.
Oh my god. What the hell?
I see some of you going to the tower, running over to the vault, sorting through all of your items, and then switching characters, and then sorting your items all over again just to realize that you missed one item, so you have to go back to the tower, back to the vault, and do it all over again. That was the way of life back in early Destiny 1, but luckily not anymore. You just have to be using an inventory management app like Dim. Seriously, this one's a lifesaver if you haven't checked it out already. And while we're talking about apps, check out D2 Checklist, D2 Recipes, Light.gg, and D2 Foundry. All of these are super useful and they'll help you keep track of your progress and plan whatever you should do next. Go check them out, trust me, they are really great. Destiny 2 is all about space magic, yet many players forget to make use of their abilities. You have huge grenades, magical turrets, and Gandalf roleplay at your disposal. But so many players pocket these abilities for the entire duration of the game. If you want to get better, you should use these things to clear out activities much faster. Just like any other FPS game, your health is a critical mechanic in Destiny 2. When it reaches 0, you die. Shocker, I know. But be honest, even if you're a veteran now, when you're first starting out, you definitely forgot to keep track of it from time to time. Maybe you even made this cardinal mistake in PvP. You're down to extremely low health, and instead of hiding behind cover to heal up, you walk right into a bullet that puts you into the death screen. Although, sometimes even a lot of health won't save you. Your best bet might just be to look up at the sky. Everyone likes big numbers, and as a YouTuber, I appreciate big numbers even more than the average gamer. But don't get fooled by this big number right here. That's the power level of your item, and it has nothing to do with how good it actually is. The perks on your item are what really matters, so don't dismantle a good roll just because it's lower in power. You can always infuse it up later. Although you should know, upgrade modules are pretty expensive and you definitely don't want to be wasting them. Most people would recommend waiting to infuse your items until you get close to the max power level. There is an exception to this rule though. If you get an identical item at a higher power level but with a worse roll, you can infuse it without paying any upgrade modules, just some glimmer. This mechanic can help you clear out your vault a little bit better while you grind away at that higher power level. Speaking of waste, make sure not to waste items that are critical to a mission objective. For example, in the new seasonal activity, you need to use these lasers to break off the hive chains on the door. So don't waste your laser ammo because otherwise you're going to need to go pick up another relic and you're probably going to have some unhappy teammates. Do you see these things? These are relics and you're supposed to use them to break immunity shields. What you might not know though is that you can turn them into huge bombs just by passing them to your friends. So many new players have no idea that this mechanic exists. And here's another common mechanic that noobs fall for in the Corrupted Strike. Your teammate's just about to start the encounter and ooh, look out. There are some legit reasons to run double primary weapons in Destiny 2. Maybe you want to pair a long-range pulse rifle with an SMG or a sidearm for PvP, or maybe you need a specific champion busting weapon setup for PvE. But many newer players out there run double primary weapons without having any idea how much more powerful special ammo weapons tend to be. Destiny 2 has a lot of really fun endgame activities, but many of these require you to level up your character's gear or else you're gonna get wrecked out there. If you're a newer player, you can tell when you're out of your league whenever you see these symbols on top of an enemy's health bar. Armor mods are insanely powerful in Destiny. They can make an otherwise ordinary build into something that is borderline overpowered. But many Destiny noobs have no idea about the potential of these mods, and you'll see them running around on the Cosmodrome with absolutely empty sockets. So spend a few minutes looking into whatever mods you might have. Speaking of armor, veteran players know how powerful certain stats can be on our armor. These days, not running high resilience is basically throwing in PvE, but what you might not know is that stats on your armor round down to the nearest 10. So if you're running 69 recovery, that might seem nice, but you're wasting 9 points that could go elsewhere in your build. Titans might seem like these friendly protectors of the city, but you never know which ones you can trust, especially those who run shoulder charge. In the Crucible, one of the most painful things for me to watch is how new players move around the map with their crosshair. I swear this is an epidemic that impacts all new FPS players. For some reason, their reticle is glued to the ground instead of pre-aiming wherever an enemy is going to show up. I have several videos covering this topic so you can learn how to do it better. I'll link these in the description. Unfortunately, no matter how good you get at PvP though, at the end of the day, the Crucible just isn't fair. Since Destiny has an item rarity system, new players quickly learn that blues tend to be better than greens and purples tend to be better than blues. But one of the hiccups is that some legendary weapons out there can be much better than exotics depending on the role and the use case. It's pretty common for noobs to think that their shiny new exotic is way better than their god rolled legendary that they just didn't appreciate enough. You see this guy? Well, most veterans know that once he pops his shield, you need a special weapon or ability to bust it. Otherwise, you're gonna look like this poor guardian over here trying to defeat him all day long. There's currently 3 types of champions, and if you don't use the right tools to take them down, you're gonna have a rough day out there. Jumping puzzles can be either some of the most fun or frustrating parts of Destiny depending on how you approach them, and many newer players make them way more difficult than necessary by choosing the wrong jump option, or at least not wearing armor that makes things a bit easier. Sure, maybe someday you want to be a pro Blink Warlock, but if you're holding up your team because you can't get through the jump puzzle, just swap over to an easier option and float your way to victory. Supers are one of your most powerful abilities, but many noobs have no idea when to actually use them. You'll often see them pop a blade barrage just as a boss reaches a health gate and becomes immune. With great power comes great responsibility, and I just told you that supers are very powerful, but some of them aren't for the faint of heart. You gotta be careful where you aim those things. This next one is a mechanic that got me killed quite a few times when this dungeon launched. In the Grasp of Avarice, you might come across these little plates on the ground. They look innocent at first, but I swear they are very, very dangerous. In the menus, you can customize so many things to make the game feel and play better, but you'll often see noobs running around with a default FOV or using awkward key bindings or controller mappings just because they didn't know any better. So take a few minutes to check out the options or watch some guides on how more experienced players like to play. Another thing you can tweak is your aiming skill. I bet many of you have never put much thought into how good your aim is, yet it's a vital part of any FPS game. Sure, aim assist in Destiny makes it a bit easier and you'll get better just by playing a whole lot, but especially if you play mouse and keyboard, using an aim trainer program can really speed up how fast your aim improves. And while we're talking about getting better with a mouse, many of you don't even have a decent surface to play on. If you play mouse and keyboard, get yourself a proper gaming mousepad to help you achieve greater consistency while you're aiming. I just created my own mousepad called the Ember Edge KX100. It's designed to be the perfect blend between speed and stopping power. I'll leave a link below if you want to check it out, or you can just go to emberedge.com to learn more. Possibly the funniest thing when playing with a new Guardian is watching their first encounter with a pack of cursed thralls. Many enemies in Destiny explode when you get too close to them, so it's best not to punch them to death. If you see a cursed thrall or an exploding shank, you better keep your distance. And on that note, you should probably also keep your distance from bosses, or else you might fall victim to that famous stomp mechanic. This dungeon seems to have a bunch of doors. I wonder which one you should pick.
Guardian down. Guardian down.
Whoop, the correct answer is none of them. You should just go through this tiny little crack in the wall. Over in Gambit land, you'll often see a noob vacuuming up every single moat in sight without any idea that an invader is about to destroy them and ruin all of their hard work. You gotta be careful out there and keep your head up. Ideally, you should even learn the invader spawns by heart so you can really style on your opponents. Or even worse, you'll see noobs trying their best to collect their 15th moat when you only need 5 moats left to spawn the boss. I know moat collecting can be a bit addictive, but pay attention to how many you need to move on to that boss fight. And perhaps the worst Gambit mistake of all is when you've collected your 15th shiny moat and then decide to investigate that interesting looking portal over there. Sure enough, you've just invaded the enemy side before banking any of your moats, and if you die, all of that progress is for nothing. It's fun to slaughter every enemy in sight, but often in strikes and missions, you can actually skip right past most of them and progress right to the next objective. You'll often see new players killing every single enemy on the battlefield with no idea that they could have saved themselves about 10 minutes by skipping the entire area. Perhaps the most serious noob mistake of all is not subscribing to Pattycakes on YouTube. Okay, I'm joking, but seriously, I do my best to make helpful resources for both new and experienced players, and it means a lot to me if you decide to subscribe. Bungie has tried to make this complex game more welcoming to new players for years, and one of their inventions was guided games. Unfortunately, barely anyone actually uses the service. Luckily, we're getting a new LFG system built right into the game during Lightfall, which is hopefully going to be awesome, but even if it's a dud, there are tons of great external community Discord servers and websites that you can use to find a group for basically any activity that you can imagine. Newer Destiny players can absolutely infuriate veterans by messing up their public events. Each one of these has a secret objective to turn it into a heroic version for better rewards, but many new players out there are oblivious to these conditions. And to make things worse, the noobs will often make it way harder to trigger the heroic version, like whenever they blow up the blights instead of shooting that big ball in the center of this one on the EDZ. You can get by just fine with minimal subclass tinkering for easy activities, but the aspects and fragment system makes your Guardian incredibly powerful with the right builds. Too many new players out there ignore these parts of the menu or even just don't know that they exist. So take a few minutes to understand how to slot these things into your subclass and watch some guides on YouTube for some really powerful builds. You see this thing? Well, that is dangerous. Stay clear of it or you might actually blow up. Such exploding objects even exist in PvP, so you want to be aware of them. I see players using exotics for the wrong subclass way too often. Celestial Nighthawk works best with Golden Gun. It's not going to help you in any way on a Night Stalker, and Raiju's Harness only works on Arcstrider. Contraverse Hold only helps you out if you're running a Voidwalker. So read those exotic descriptions, and if you're in doubt, look up a guide, but don't be wasting that precious exotic slot for no benefit. Sometimes reading can only get you so far, and often Bungie actually messes up their descriptions, but as a rule of thumb, the word combatants almost always refers to PvE enemies exclusively, whereas targets refers to both PvE enemies and enemy players in PvP. So make sure that whatever mods you equip actually work in PvP before you load in there, otherwise you're going to be wasting your mod slots. Some quests you'll find in the wild are not part of the seasonal content or any campaign. Instead, they award exotic weapons. However, most of the time these quests don't actually announce whatever weapon you're going to get. This makes a lot of players hesitant to go after them, but in the end they're missing out on potentially awesome pieces of equipment. So make sure to check out the rewards for whatever quest you might have. Destiny 2 LFG can be a menacing place, especially since the users out there can become quite toxic and hostile. Nevertheless, it's still one of the best ways to find a fire team, and it's almost impossible to avoid using it as a newer player. Some of the jargon can be quite tricky to understand though. To let you in on a secret, KWTD stands for Know What to Do. If you don't actually know the mechanics of an activity, you probably shouldn't join one of these groups. People will find out that you don't know the mechanics, and then you're going to have some uncomfortable explaining to do. And for your own safety in these activities, mind the gap between the platforms and the train. That advice applies to Destiny 2 just like it does in the real world. Check out emberedge.com if you're interested in my awesome new mousepad, and up next I think you'd enjoy my video about 43 things that only Destiny veterans know. It's linked on screen and in the description.